We start in the United States, where Congress has given final approval to Donald Trump's request to claw back $9 billion of government spending. The so-called rescission package cancels funding that lawmakers have already allocated. The bill narrowly passed last night in the House of Representatives, with only 2 Republicans joining Democrats to oppose it. Most of the cuts target foreign aid approved before Trump returned to office, programs the White House now describes as waste, fraud and abuse. Democrats say the aid freeze is reckless and will impact global health and cost lives in the world's poorest countries. Well, the legislation also slashes more than $1 billion for American public media, which US conservatives had long accused of being biased against them. Donald Trump whipped Republicans into line last week, posting on social media, "It is very important that all Republicans adhere to my rescissions bill, and in particular defund the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, PBS and NPR. Any Republican that votes to allow this monstrosity to continue broadcasting will not have my support or endorsement." Well, NPR, that's National Public Radio, and PBS, the Public Broadcasting Service, were established back in the 1960s as non-profit media networks. Government subsidies provided programming and support for hundreds of member radio and TV stations, who also raise funds through other means. PBS, which is one of Deutsche Welle's international partners, is one of the main providers of children's educational programs in the US, with shows like Sesame Street, which has been a TV staple for generations of Americans and millions of children around the world. PBS President and CEO Paula Kerger says the cuts go against the will of the American people and will be devastating for smaller stations in and rural areas. In a statement, she said many of our stations, which provide access to free, unique, local programming and emergency alerts, will now be forced to make hard decisions in the weeks and months ahead. Ryan Howlett is CEO of Friends of South Dakota Public Broadcasting, which raises funds for public media. He joins us from Sioux Falls. Welcome to DW. What sort of impact do you think these cuts are going to have?
Bill, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here on the day. I think what Paula said is exactly correct. I think it's going to have a devastating impact on the public media system across the country. You know, for us here in South Dakota, we operate 9 full-power TV stations and 12 radio stations across the state. And, you know, we're a large geographic area with only about 900,000 people. And so we're the sole service in some of these areas. And we're going to be forced to choose what type of material or what type of content we have going forward, you know, what services we're able to provide. And so it's really going to be a struggle going forward, and we are going to face some very difficult choices.
So here's the thing. This is America. The US has a multiplicity of TV, radio, and satellite stations and streamers that pay their own way. So explain to us why it matters if the United States loses a few what they would call woke stations that they can't pay for themselves.
Great question. I would contend that woke is not a word to describe your local PBS or NPR station. And I think the answer to that question is it's a robust media ecosystem. You know, we don't do the same things that commercial broadcasting does. What they do is important, and I want every one of those stations to be successful. We're the only station in the state of South Dakota that covers the entire state and is able to tell stories from the east side to the west side and disseminate that all together. We're also the only locally owned television station in the state now. Everything else is owned by a media company outside of South Dakota. So that's telling other people's states. And you have seen the amount of journalism that has shuttered, you know, over 3,000 newspapers in the last decade. When stations go away and journalism goes away, it becomes a more dangerous environment for everybody because people don't have access to the news. I mean, it's as simple as that.
President Trump's been gunning for PBS for some time. What's his beef with the broadcaster?
I mean, I will take him at his word that he firmly believes that, we're not fair. But I would contend if you look at any media survey, PBS and NPR comes out as fairly middle of the road. Yeah, sometimes we don't get things right, but, our coverage, largely accurate, largely fair. I think that this is more than anything large scale, a First Amendment issue, when we do have government tax dollars, and I do feel like we've earned them with our coverage, with our local material that we've produced, our national material that we've produced. When we don't have access to those tax dollars, that was how the system was created, and the system
Right.
will change, and when the administration targets that, I think it's a First Amendment issue, and it's taking away something that is there to hold our leaders, both Republican and Democrat, accountable.
Let's turn to the wider US media landscape. There's been a lot happening recently. We saw ABC settle with the president over a defamation lawsuit. CBS also bent the knee over a 60 Minutes interview. What's going on?
I think that's a very scary trend of media intimidation, and I worry about that. A free and fair press is vital to democracy, and if we lose that here in the United States and across the globe, that is a humongous problem for democracies and a free society. So, it's a scary trend.
Good talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Ryan Howlett from Friends of South Dakota Public Broadcasting.
Thanks for having me, Phil.